All right, well, suddenly the Celtics and Bucks conference semifinals. It is a best of five. C's and Bucks, of course, they split the two games at the Garden. It's off to Milwaukee in, as we sit here, a couple days, Saturday afternoon, game three. Sean Deveney, Heavy.com, joins the program. I'm Adam Kaufman. Not to worry, Evan Valenti is not on vacation. He is lurking in the background. He is doing his usual production work, and you can count on him in some way, shape, or form being part of the show. But I'm just happy, Sean, that we don't have to come in here all doom and gloom and, rattling off the percentages of, when a team drops the first two home games of a best of seven series, what are the odds they come back to it? Yada, yada, yada. It's right. Positivity for a few days, feeling good. It's a brand new us.
Yeah, you came up on my video here, and I was wondering who you're going to be rooting for in Game 3, but I think I've got my answer. So,
yep.
Look, it's obviously going down 0-2 at home is nearly an impossible task. We did see it last year with the Clippers, but certainly not a hole you want to dig yourself into. And I think the encouraging thing is not just that the Celtics won that second game the way they won it. It's the way they bounced back, the way they corrected a lot of things that went wrong in Game 1. It looked a lot more like the team we've seen going back to December 31st, really.
You weren't expecting there to be a lack of bias on a show called Celtics Week, were you?
I would have been disappointed if there wasn't as much bias.
Yeah, the show isn't called your NBA runaround or something like that. I mean, this is all about bleeding green here. I gotta get a Celtics tattoo on my forearm just to be able to show off to the people. Let's pick up though right where you began, which I had on my list of things that I wanted to get to with you, because I think it's a very good place to start, which is, what do we expect in Game 3 off of these first two games? After that first game, Sean, where I don't want to say the Bucks were great. They weren't, let's not overplay what they did. Like, they were certainly limited on offense because the Celtics were very, very good defensively in that game. But the Celtics, I think were so bad offensively that it made some people respect what the Bucks did in Game 1 defensively, maybe a little too much. I think there was a lot of miss, missing a lot of easy open opportunities. Easy for me to say, obviously, but, shots that the Jaylen Browns and Jason Tatums and Grant Williams and Peyton Pritchard and these guys, they just don't miss all that often, at least not all in the same game. And, more and more metrics came out where it was the Celtics really, based on some of the advanced stats that are out there, and I won't run them all down for the people. You've probably seen the tweets by now, but the Celtics had offensively their second worst game of the entire season. Not just, that's 80 some odd games. The entire year they played their second worst game of the whole year in Game 1 against Milwaukee. So I kept tweeting out, look, I don't know if the Celtics are going to win Game 2 or not, but I know there's just no way they can be that bad offensively again against a Bucks team in general, against anybody, but against a Bucks team that really, they actually had some pretty good offensive success against during the regular season. So you tell me, ahead of Game 3, was this team, or is this team, more like what we saw in Game 1 or more like what we saw in Game 2, or is there a happy medium there?
Yeah, I think it'll be more like what we saw in Game 2. I think that they made some of the mistakes that they were making early on in the year in Game 1, in terms of the lack of ball movement for one thing, but then also falling in love with the three-pointer. Obviously they took 43 in Game 2, so it's not like they shied away from the shot altogether. But taking 50 in Game 1 was just far too many. And the thing is that I know everybody hates the mid-range shot. It's the worst thing you can do in the NBA is take a 15-footer these days. But the Celtics aren't bad at that. And especially Jaylen Brown is about a 46-47% mid-range shooter. And if he's going to get switched where he has 6'2" Drew Holiday on him, he's got to look for that 15-footer because he can just shoot it right over him. It's a pretty good shot. In that first game, they were 0 for 4 on mid-range shots, and one of those was Nick Stauskas with 10 seconds left, so we can kind of cut that one. They just weren't. They were either trying to get to the basket or they were taking threes. And there's an advanced stats mind that says that perfect It's not. Sometimes that's not what the defense is giving you. Milwaukee's going to give you those mid-range shots. If you've got a guy like Jaylen Brown, he's got to be taking them because it's a shot he can make. It's a high percentage shot relative to what else you're going to get. I think if they continue that mentality and they continue to say, we're not going to take 50 mid-range shots, but certainly if we can take, 15 to 20 good ones, then we've got to be willing to do that.
I don't know, Sean, if there are any Bucks fans out there listening, just looking for the Celtics perspective on things, but for the sake of not being like 100% totally, completely slanted all the time, the Bucks aren't going to be as bad in game 3 as they were in game 2 either. I mean, this is they had 86 points. They had 86 points, which again, season low across their entire year, not just playoffs. The Bucks offensively have not been that bad the entire year. And again, much like what I said with that first question, you give a lot of credit to the Celtics defense as well, but it was also just a bad offensive day for the Bucks. Part of that is, continuing to adjust and not having Chris Middleton. Some of that obviously is just, some of the role players are going to ultimately be better. And we'll, as we get a little deeper into the show, get specifically to what the Celtics have been doing with regard to Giannis Antetokounmpo and what sorts of adjustments will continue to be made there. But what kind of bounce back offensively do you expect from Milwaukee here in this next one, especially being at home?
Yeah, no question that they're going to try to continue to do the things that they were doing in game 1. One thing that was a criticism for a long time of Mike Budenholzer and until he won a championship, it's funny how those things will change, is that that he didn't make very many adjustments. And they're not going to make that many adjustments. They're going to continue to play the way they've always played. I think that one of the real concerns that you have to have if you're Budenholzer is just the number of shots that your other guys were getting, because most of the shots were going through Giannis and Drew Holiday. Part of that was turnovers. Part of that was Celtics did a much better job rebounding in game 2. So you've really got to, if you're Budenholzer, you've got to make some adjustments to help those two things, cut down on the turnovers, and try to get some other guys shots. In game 2, Giannis and Drew Holiday took 47 shots. Everybody else took 26. In game 1, that was 45-45. So those two guys took 45 shots. Everybody else took 45. That's what you want. You want more of a balance there. And of course, you're also talking about taking 18 fewer shots in game 2. That's a matter of turnovers and rebounds.
One thing that was a real difference for the Celtics offense, Sean, in these 2 games, at least depending on, how you were paying, like you referenced the number of 3-pointers that were taken. Of course, the numbers were pretty similar, not just in terms of attempts, but made threes. And it gets a lot of attention when you say, hey, Celtics made a franchise playoff record 23 pointers in game 2. They won by 23 points. It's easy to forget, at least in the moment, of saying that, well, they hit 18 in game 1 and lost by 12. The number was not all that different. The big difference, again, sort of the anomaly that was game 1, was they hit a franchise record low number of 2-pointers. They were just so bad. They weren't great from 3. I mean, they still hit 35, 36%. More often than not, you're going to take that from 3, especially hitting 18 3-pointers. But is this how Milwaukee, and we talked a lot about this going into the series and sort of coming to fruition, but I'm curious as to your thoughts. Is this how Milwaukee is electing to defend Boston? Is it just, look, you're going to do how you do from 3, and in large part, that's going to defend the outcome or define the outcome of these games, because hitting 18 in game 1, hitting 20 in game 2, what should we expect in game 3 and beyond here?
Yeah, I mean, it's what Budenholzer has done since he got there. Has really been, he has changed his defense somewhat. They do more switching. And when he first got there, they weren't doing any switching at all. That was one of the criticisms of him. He does have a more varied defense than he has in the past, and that's been beneficial in the playoffs. So, certainly we'll see some adjustments as we go. But packing the paint, that's always going to be something that's going to be a staple of the Bucks defense. They're going to make it really tough for you to get inside and to get easy baskets. They're going to try to take away transition. They're going to take away everything they can from them. That's what they do, and that's what they're going to continue to do. And then they're going to try to sell out on contests out to the 3-point line. Again, they'll give you those shots, and certainly even in game one, the Celtics had plenty of open shots. We saw that they had plenty of open shots from the 3-point line. But the Bucks will, do what they can to try to do as many runouts and make those 3-pointers, excuse me, at least a little bit contested. That's the way that they've always played defense. I don't think that's going to change very much. But they are going to make it as hard as they can to get into that paint. That's since Budenholzer has been a coach, this goes back to Atlanta as well. That's been sort of the foundation of the way that he's coached defense, and I just don't see that changing. So again, the best shots the Celtics are often going to have are going to be in the mid-range, those elbow jumpers. And I like Jaylen Brown. I like his odds when he takes those shots, especially if you can get a switch, if you can get Drew Holiday or Grayson Allen or whoever it is, you've got the size advantage. You can shoot over the guy. I think you got to take those shots. So this is it's kind of typical of the way Milwaukee has played defense over the last 4 or 5 years. So I don't think we'll see a whole lot change in terms of that. And the Celtics have to continue to go to what has been working, and that's what's been working.
I realize how good, Jason Tatum was in game 2, or obviously Grant Williams, both ends of the floor, his career high 21 points in the playoffs, and obviously the defense on Giannis and Horford's role defensively on Giannis and some of the other guys. But, you've been talking about Jaylen Brown here, and I think that I know he sort of gets a little bit of flack for disappearing in the second half. He only had 5 second half points, but he was as important as anybody else in that victory, just as being a tone setter in that opening half. From Giannis being contained, limited, whatever, not altogether stopped because you can't stop him. But for Jaylen to go off for 25 points just in the first half, which is more than double what he had in game 1 in totality, it just I don't think that can be underappreciated. The question really is, can he do it or anything similar to it again?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to have to. He's got to be aggressive. They're obviously going to put the bulk of their defensive attention on Jason Tatum, and so it's got to be Jaylen Brown who's able to get free and get some shots that he likes. That's and you're right. I mean, even if, as long as he comes out aggressive and starts off that way and makes the Bucks aware of his presence right from the beginning, then that forces the rest of the team now. Okay, how much do I commit to trying to get the ball out of Jason Tatum's hands if I've got Jaylen Brown there as well? So that's going to be a real key. I mean, opening this game, especially going on the road, you don't want to be in a position where you're on your heels trying to come back. You want to be in a position where you're taking the fight to them. To open, so you don't get the crowd, sort of cascading on you right from the beginning. And that crowd's been terrific. So that's something that they've got to be really, really aware of is keeping up that aggressive level, that level of aggressiveness, especially what we saw from Jaylen Brown. So that's going to be a real key going on the road. You got 3 days off. I mean, you're going to be well rested. You get Marcus Smart back. They've got every reason to come out and really be firing right from the beginning.
So we've been talking for 15 minutes or so, and you saying Marcus Smart right there might be the first time that we've mentioned his name here in the show. And he is, while it's not definitive, he is expecting to be back for game 3. I think if, as painful as it is, obviously for fans or for people who just enjoy watching basketball, or, those of us, it's like, we don't have a game tonight as we sit here right now here on Thursday. Like, let's go Celtics Bucks. We want to see it again. This 3 days off, 3 full days between games, while it feels like an eternity, for me, probably for you and many out there listening, it really is advantageous, I would think, for the Celtics right now. Certainly for Smart and looking to come back, Jaylen Brown in managing that hamstring injury, anybody else who has dings and bumps and bruises. And I fully recognize that works both ways. The Bucks are, healing they're licking their wounds and everything else, but they're not getting Chris Middleton back, here in this series. They're certainly not getting him back for games 3 or 4 if he does sneak back for the end of a long series. But, I just think for Smart to be off, for them to be as successful as they were without him, to, again, hold the Bucks to a season low 86 points, to play as locked in as, the continuity that there was, and for him to now come back, as he hopefully will, and continue to be that, heart and soul, as everyone has called him, and sort of head of the snake defensively, it can only help Boston. As many ways as I look at game 1 as an anomaly, I think defensively, I look at aspects of game 2 as an anomaly, meaning typically you're not going to do what they did without Marcus Smart.
Yeah, I think that's right. And when you look at it, look, if Derrick White had come in and made 4 out of 8 3-pointers, and you start to say, geez, they really needed that. And Marcus, he was 0 for 6. So, moving him back to the bench, I don't think you're really going to, feel that so much. Having Marcus Smart up there defensively, I think a few more days of rest. Don't forget for Robert Williams too. That he's not 100%. So every day off that he gets is extra beneficial. So that's going to help as well. But yeah, getting Marcus back, I'm curious to see what Ime Udoka does. Marcus loves matching up with Giannis. He really does. And he does a pretty good job of it for a guy who's given up 7 or 8 inches. But it's when you look at what the Celtics have done so far, do you want to go away from that? Do you want to just see how that keeps working before you start making an adjustment? Do you make an adjustment in advance of something and maybe create a problem when there isn't one? Or do you just kind of stick with what you've got? I'm curious to see what Udoka does with that, whether he puts that kind of pressure on Marcus right away, at least for some possessions, to give Giannis a different look, and again, a guy who liked guarding him and has done okay with it in the past. So I'm curious to see how that goes, but offensively as well. Like I say, it's not like Derrick White came in and burned up the Nets. So you're not going to be nothing but positive on that side of the ledger. So I'm curious to see what Marcus Smart does. Coming out and how aggressive he is and how they use him defensively as well.
Let's keep going with defending Giannis, whether it's Marcus Smart, obviously, in whatever role that he plays in there, Sean, or obviously Al Horford, Grant Williams. There was a stat that was floating around games 1 and 2, according to NBA stats. Giannis Antetokounmpo specifically against Horford and Grant, 106 possessions, 37 points, 14 of 40 shooting, 5 shooting fouls drawn, 7 turnovers, 11 assists. So, I think that's, I've said it 1,000 times over. I'm not, alone in saying this. Giannis is not a guy that you can stop. You can't just, take Giannis out of a game, even in the same way that the Celtics found ways to take Kevin Durant out or Kyrie Irving out in that first round against Brooklyn. It's Giannis a whole different animal, man. So all you can do is kind of hope to contain him. Even game 1, the Celtics did a good job on Giannis in game 1. He still had a triple-double and dominated the game. So it was that much more noteworthy, obviously, what they did in game 2. How do you continue doing this here going forward?
Yeah, I think that, first of all, you start with the 2 guys that you mentioned. That's Horford and Grant Williams. Ime talked about this the other day, and it makes good sense. And you could see it in game 2 as a difference between game 1 and game 2, is you've got to trust those guys a little bit. Let them do some individual defending against Giannis. They're both strong guys. He's not going to run over them. If you get him set up, then they can at least keep him in those mid-range jumpers and keep him away from the basket before you send that double team. They still want to double team him, but if you look at game 1, they were sending that double real fast. It was almost like the guys were intimidated by him, and as soon as he got the ball, it was like, maybe we should be doubling. Let's go double. Let's do it. Rather than having some patience with it and say, all right, when Al Horford looks like he's in trouble or it's getting late in the shot clock, then we're going to send the double team. When Grant Williams is in trouble, then we'll send the double team. But you're going to give those guys a chance to do some individual defending before you just send that right away. Because Giannis, don't forget when Giannis came in, I think it was 2013. I remember hearing about this big Greek kid, who was going to be a 6'11" point guard, right? That was the thing. He was going to be a point guard coming in because of his ball handling and passing ability. He still has that passing ability. He's not a point guard, obviously, but he can still pass. And you really saw that in game 1, that he just picked them apart. When they sent those double teams, if they sent him too quick, he's going to pick you apart with his passing. And if they're making shots, he's going to easily get 10, 12, 13 assists like he did in game 1. So they've got to be patient with those double teams. You want to send them and you want to give him that look, no question. But there's times where you want to back off and let Grant, let Al do some defending before you send that double team.
So we do have a couple of questions from Twitter on this subject that I wanted to save for this point in the show. From J.K. Ballin, Game 2 defensive adjustment to not help on Giannis to find the C's advantage. What wrinkle or adjustment will they add in Game 3 to stay a step ahead?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, the thing about Budenholzer is he doesn't change that much. I'd like to see them run some more pick and roll with Giannis, and either as the roll man or as the ball handler. Both ways, he's a very efficient scorer. When they run pick and roll with him, they don't do it that much. They only do it a few times per game. But he's in the 80th percentile on both of those categories in terms of his efficiency when you use him in pick and roll. I wonder if they'll try that. I think that's something that could be effective against the Celtics, especially if you're going to have him single teamed against guys who are fairly slow defenders. As good as Al and Grant Williams are, nobody's going to pick them to win a sprint. I think so. As long as that's the case, I think you could definitely put them in pick and roll. It's not something that the Bucks do a lot of. But it's something to look out for because I think it could be pretty effective against the way the Celtics are trying to defend them right now.
Another one here, and sort of bleeds into some of what we've been talking about, but there's enough new in here from Toyota's very own. Can Giannis take it to another level? Or is this, why he has Middleton? The fact that Jason hasn't really gone off so far yet, is that a good sign?
Yeah, I mean, they've got to find ways to get him going downhill. That's one thing that the Celtics have been effective. Like I said before, the pick and roll is a good way to do that. There are other ways, you don't have to do the picking. There's other screens that you can set to get him, moving toward the basket. I think he's been a little too stagnant. Maybe some of that's on him. Maybe some of that's on the coach. But there's got to be more movement involving him. I think the rest of the team has done a good job as far as the Bucks go and moving, trying to get open, trying to give Giannis the passing lanes that he needs. But if you want to get Giannis going and get him some easy buckets, I think some of it's got to be movement on his part, whether that's pick and roll or just some other screens that get him going downhill toward the basket. That's when he's most dangerous. Certainly, if you get out in transition, that's again the Celtics really do try to take that away, like most teams do. But if you're the Bucks and you really want to see Giannis out on the fast break, that's the ideal situation.
If there's something, and tell me if I'm just, talking out of my butt here, which is totally fine. But I feel like in watching these games, as compared especially to that Nets series and their superstars, as well as the Celtics have done so far on Giannis, I don't feel like I see Giannis out there getting frustrated. I feel like he's still just, he's still Giannis. He's still just, in his mind, he's not worried about what they're doing to him. He feels like the best is still, is yet to come. He's not flustered. He's not, how do I get around this? How do I beat these guys? How do I improve my percentages? I feel like he's still kind of right where, I realize the numbers aren't where he wants them to be, but he within his game is still kind of where he wants to be, or is at least in that range of outcomes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think he's had some frustrations in terms of the shots that he's missed, but he hasn't let that affect him. I think he's, like I say, he's such a great passer. That he's always going to have that, and he's never been a guy to get frustrated at teammates, even if they're not making their shots. So you haven't seen much of that. I think the free throw line is probably something to keep an eye on. He's going to continue to be aggressive. And if he gets one of those games where he goes to the line 17, 18 times and he can make a fair number of those, which is always a question mark. Obviously that's improved for him over time, but still a question mark. But if he gets and he goes 13 for 18 from the free throw line, that's going to really help him as well in terms of his shooting. So that's probably, to me, an X factor in the two games going back to Milwaukee is going to be Giannis at the free throw line. And what do we see from him there? How often does he get there? Is he going to get a lot more calls on his home floor than he got in Boston? That's going to really affect how the Celtics defend him. Can he get Grant Williams or Al Horford into foul trouble, or if they have Tatum and Brown on him, can he get them into foul trouble? That's going to be a big factor in these two games in Milwaukee.
You're probably on the record somewhere for this, be it on a podcast or in one of your articles. I just haven't seen it. Where did you have this Celtics Bucks series going when it started? What was your prediction going?
Yeah, I thought it was going to be a 7-game series. I don't think I'm alone in that, given the nature of this matchup and just the way these two teams have played throughout the course of the year. I thought the Celtics would win. I thought the home court would come through in a 7th game. I still think that, watching these first 2 games, there's nothing there that makes me think that this thing is not going to go 7, because it's such a great matchup. And I think the Celtics will get that little extra boost from getting Marcus Smart back and just get a little healthier in game 3. And they'll be able to win one of these games in Milwaukee, come back home tied up at 2-2.
So I was just going to ask you that. Is that, you feel pretty confident we're looking at this becoming a best of 3 here in a couple of games versus Boston having kind of squandered an opportunity at home in the first 2?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no question that was an opportunity squandered. If you lose a game at home, especially where you just kind of don't show up, or the team that we've seen didn't show up, and what was, no question the biggest game of the year, then yeah, that's a squandered opportunity. But it's been a resilient team. It's been a team that's been able to bounce back. And I've seen enough from Milwaukee, especially without Chris Middleton, to make me think this is not an invincible bunch. Drew Holiday has not been great, and he really needs to be great. And when you get past Drew Holiday, like I say, it's a pretty steep drop. Their role players do a very good job filling their roles, but they don't really have that number 2. And I think that's going to cost them in one of these next 2 games.
It is interesting when you look at a hierarchy, right? For you could do this with any series across the league. This isn't specifically a Celtics Bucks thing, but you look at sort of just the balance of the rosters, and obviously best player in the series, at least on paper, without question, is Giannis Antetokounmpo. But after that, the next 2, I would think, goes to Boston. It's Tatum and it's Brown, and then maybe you go to Holiday from there, and it just sort of bounces at that point with Middleton not involved here. In terms of the role players, and that's not specifically the bench, but the role players, who do you give the edge to here?
I give the edge to the Celtics. And again, that's with a healthy Marcus Smart, with Robert Williams, him getting better and getting more acclimated to playing regular minutes, which I still don't think really has happened, given the fact that just played game 3 and game 4 and not a ton of minutes in those. And so he's still getting back to 100%. Look, Brook Lopez is not the same guy he was even last year to me, but certainly not 2 years ago or when the Bucks started this run when he first went to Milwaukee. He's taken a step back, and then you get into Grayson Allen has been very good, but played above his talent level, and I think we're seeing that kind of come back down a little bit to what his level is. Bobby Portis, same thing. I mean, he's been fantastic. I don't think he can maintain that. He's playing above. And he did it last year in the playoffs. He's really good in the playoffs last year. Obviously, he's a good playoff player. But at the same time, he's punching above his weight a little bit. And to me, from the Celtics, I think you're seeing a kind of effort from the role players that is maintainable, that you can rely on. And maybe there's even some, I think Derrick White can play better, obviously. Peyton Pritchard, better. I think. It's a low bar so far, but I have no question he can play better. He has to play better, and I think he will. Maybe we'll see Daniel Tice at some point if MA decides to, throw a wrinkle in there. I just think that right now the Celtics have more cards to play, and the guys who haven't played well have more to go. That they can give more. Whereas I think that what we've seen from the Bucks and their role players has pretty much been what we're going to see with them at their best.
He probably doesn't care. He's probably not listening to it. He's certainly not listening to us right now. But I do feel a little bad for Derrick White in that he's got I don't know if this was true with the Spurs, but it's certainly here in Boston. He's got a little Marcus Smart in him in the sense that, people that are more casual and just kind of look at the box score, they just assume if the guy is, isn't putting up X number of points or isn't hitting X number of shots or shooting at least, whatever percentage from the field, he sucks, and that's, what Ime said the other day and has said countless times before, not having Marcus for game 2, unfortunate. You'd love to have a defensive player of the year anytime you can have him. But it's true that the Celtics don't lose a ton on that end of the floor with Derrick White. They don't. I mean, he truthfully, like, for a guy that went 0 for 6 or, no points and he actually had a good game too. And it's not spin. Like, he played 28 minutes, Sean, and he was a plus 22, which was tied with Grant Williams for the best in the game. I'm not going to sit here and say he was phenomenal. He had a great game, but he certainly didn't have a bad game in game 2. And I think a lot of people just sort of look at the raw numbers and assume that he did. And that's sort of where we're at with Derrick White over the last, weeks, months, going back to kind of when this.
Right. It goes to since he's been here. You're right. And that goes to since he's been in Boston. When he got here and he was shooting whatever it was, 28% from the 3-point line in his first, 15 games or so, but they were winning. It wasn't a big deal that he wasn't shooting great. It wasn't really that noticeable. He's coming off the bench and providing them with sort of defensive spark and enough ball handling off the bench, and that's what you wanted out of him. And then toward the end of the year, he started making some shots, and you say, well, this is just gravy, right? But I mean, look, they're going to need something out of him, though. They're going to need something offensively. They can't have a goose egg. From a guy that they're going to play, 28, 30 minutes or whatever it's going to be. They've got to get some production out of him. No question about that. But you're right that it hasn't been a big deal because he's doing enough other stuff that you just don't really notice the Horfords that we've seen. Like I said, especially in his first, whatever it was, month or so with the Celtics, where he really did struggle with the shooting. It just wasn't noticeable because they were winning, and he was out there making winning plays.
I want to phrase this. I guess I want to put a caveat in front of this, just so that I'm being perfectly clear to anyone that would otherwise maybe misinterpret what I'm saying. Within his role, that's the precursor here. Within his role, Al Horford's been exceptional this season. Exceptional. For what the Celtics have asked him to do, he's not a top 25 player in the NBA or something like that. I'm not suggesting that somebody give him a new contract for $30 million a year at, age 36 or however old he is at this point. Al Horford, though, the way that they have used him, the way that they have managed his minutes, managed his workload, I mean, he's playing like he's 30. He has turned back the clock, Sean. I know you know this. You've watched him closely. You've written about him very recently. And this is, a constant sort of talking point in some of the text threads that I'm on with friends of mine who are Celtics fans while we're all watching these games. I do wonder what the Celtics, Brad Stevens obviously loves Al Horford, probably still doesn't get enough credit for flipping Kemba for Horford in terms of the net both ways, quite frankly, right. What you're losing and what you're gaining. But I wonder what they do with him going forward, given, that looming price tag for him next season, but he fits so damn well.
Yeah. And he's also been really important in what we've seen from Robert Williams, that, getting him back, that's gone a long way toward the development of Robert Williams, the consistency, the lack of the mental mistakes that we used to see. Some of the crazy fouls, that a lot of that, you've got to give Al credit. He's worked very closely with Robert Williams. So you got to give him some credit for that as well. At the same time, he's due $26.5 million next year. They can say, you know what, we're done. We're going to let you go, Al. And the contract is only guaranteed for $14.5 million. You save that $12 million unless they go to the finals. Then it's $19.5 million, and maybe then at that point it's easier to figure. But that there's a big implication for that $12 million because that puts them so far over the luxury tax that it gets them up near the luxury tax apron. And what that means is that you've got the $17 million Evan Fournier trading player exception. that you can't use. If you're too close to the tax, you cannot go over the apron with the trade exception. So you're not going to be able to use that 17 million if you keep Al Horford. It's going to be you can maybe get rid of some other contracts and create a little wiggle room, but you're not going to be able to use that 17 million if you keep Al Horford. The question becomes, though, Adam, who are you going to get with that 17 million? You know, a trade exception is going to get you a Josh Richardson, for instance. It's going to give you a guy who another team is okay with just getting rid of the contract, and you might have to give up, maybe a first round pick if it's a good player, a second round pick if it's not a great player. You have to decide then: are you going to get somebody with that TPE who's better than Al, who's going to do better for you than what Al is going to do next year? And I think at the beginning of the year, the answer was probably, yeah, there's no way they're going to guarantee him at $26.5 million for next season. At this point, I don't know. I mean, look who they could possibly get. Who are you going to bring in at this point who's going to have a bigger impact for what you're doing than what Al Horford is? Just by using a traded player. Except I think it's a much bigger question now than it was even a few months ago, to the point where, you talk to people around the league and they think, yeah, he's probably sticking around. That means too much to that team to just let him go.
Getting under
what would you do?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say, because I think the way you presented it is exactly right, which is you have to look at it and say, is player X better for us than Al Horford? I think ultimately that's what it's going to come down to with whomever it is that could spring available. I think part of it too, and sounds like a cop-out, I realize, but we just, short of like Zach LaVine, who's constantly being talked about as someone who could be on the move next year, we don't really have a sense of, what stars, borderline stars, could be looking for a change, or teams that could be, looking to move them. So it's just, forecasting right now that becomes very difficult.
Yeah. But I mean, you can look at, like I say, you can look at that $17 million that you could possibly have. Right. And understanding that it's just a traded player exception. So you're not giving up anything. You're just taking back somebody. And the caliber of players that teams are going to be willing to just give up to you, or to do a sign and trade so they can get their own, sort of like what happened with Evan Fournier. Yeah. It's not going to be great. You could get, say, Robert Covington. Is he really going to be better than Al Horford, though? If you really watched Robert Covington over this year, he was terrible. He was not the player that you would have thought of, 3-4 years ago. But that's the kind of guy that you're looking at. And at some point you have to say, not just on the floor. Obviously, there is, like you mentioned, Al's been great on the floor, but the off the floor stuff too that he brings. Culture-wise, is it going to really be beneficial to let him go, even if it's and look, it's not our $26 million, so it's easy for us to sit here and say, but it's just it's hard to see where that's going to be a benefit to the Celtics in the end, where they're going to be able to get anybody, because, like I say, the PPA is you're giving up nothing for something, and if you're giving up nothing, then you're probably not going to, like I said, Josh Richardson was the guy that got last year. That's the caliber of guy that we're talking about. I don't know that there's a guy out there that's going to make me think, let's get rid of Al Horford and bring in this guy.
But continuing in the spirit of, hey, it's not our money. I know that, something that was really painful to a lot of Celtics fans over the course of, last offseason and into this year around the trade deadline. And, because nobody at that time envisioned this team becoming a contender, obviously, which certainly it has at this point. I certainly didn't foresee any of this happening, especially going back to the early months of the season under Ime and the way these guys were clicking and lack of buy-in and all of that. We don't need to relive it because it was so painful, obviously. But one of the things that was hard was, there was this sort of, looming question of, is ownership willing to pay into the tax, for a contender? They've always said they are. Well, now you have a team that very clearly, regardless of what does end up happening this year, you have the pieces to be a contender. Are they going to be willing to spend into the tax, even if it means, hey, it doesn't work out and the next year they got to revert course and, get back under? Fine. Like, that's a problem for future Wick and Pags and all those guys. Right. Do you think that, this coming off season into next year, they'll be willing to get a little fiscally uncomfortable in order to, get to banner whatever number it is if 18 comes this year,
Yeah, I think they put themselves in a position where they almost have to. If you look at the way things are structured right now, unless you're going to give up Marcus Smart, unless you're not going to extend or give a new deal to Jaylen Brown when he's up in 2 years, unless you're not going to give an extension to Grant Williams, who I think has probably earned himself a decent contract, certainly in the last 4 months or so, then that's the only way you're going to avoid the luxury tax. Other than that, you're in it. And I think it's, we saw this at the trade deadline this year where I think what they were doing at the trade deadline this year by trying to get under that tax is avoiding the repeater tax. You don't want to be over and over in the tax, then you get some real severe penalties. So I think they were avoiding the tax this year in order to say, okay, we're going to be in the tax next year, and then we'll deal with it from there. And I think that's the situation that they're in. And that does go back to Al Horford. He's going to have his $26 million on the books this year. And it comes off after that. You can still sign him, at a reasonable number, whether it's a more of a mid-range deal, $5-6 million a year, whatever it is. But you do get some relief there as you start to get into the extension for Robert Williams, for Grant Williams, for these other contracts you're going to have to pay. But I think there's an acknowledgement that they're going to have to be in the tax next season, and that's one of the reasons that they tried so hard to get under the tax in February at the trade deadline.
I do have to ask you while we're sort of talking along these lines, and we'll wrap up in a couple minutes here. But you had a report in a week and change ago that the Celtics are a dark horse, along with I believe it was the Miami Heat, a dark horse with the Heat to sign Carmelo Anthony. And I know a lot of people scoffed at that, Sean. Not because people question your reporting. You're very good at what you do, but it was looking at Melo and saying, like, how does this guy fit? What they're looking to do, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Like if there's one thing it feels like Brad and Ime have collectively done or jointly done together, it's like weed out anybody who doesn't play, elite defense. And then you talk about the idea of a Carmelo Anthony coming in. I mean, do you put any stock of that being like a real possibility?
Yeah, it was something that they considered before he signed with Portland 3 years ago. I mean, they had considered bringing him in. I think what the negatives are with Carmelo, but what the positives are too. I think there's been some good experiences with him in terms of his leadership. Which wasn't what you would have said 15 years ago about him, but it is now. Certainly he's a guy who can come in and make shots for you and stretch the floor. I think that's something that the Celtics need a little bit more of, especially something that if it's somebody that they can trust with that. And again, look, I mean, when I was talking to the executive who mentioned the Celtics, he had them, like I said, as a dark horse. Miami has another dark horse, but said going back to the Lakers is the most likely thing, if not then going to Brooklyn and finishing out his career with the Nets. So, if I had to put a percentage on it, the Celtics would be pretty low on that percentage part. But certainly it's something that, the team considered before and I think would consider again.
Well, he could go back to L.A. LeBron could name himself head coach, and they could, load up the banana boat and continue to get his butt.
I'd like to see him finish up.
Is in the league.
I think going back to Brooklyn makes the most sense for me. If I was him, finish out your career with the Nets. They almost signed him back in 2019. Yeah. Kevin Durant really wanted him, and it was basically the front office that was like, said what you just said, and that is, he doesn't play enough defense, we're not going to sign him. But he was pretty effective with the Lakers, just as a shooter. Obviously not a great defender, but as a guy who's going to come in, play 15, 20 minutes and make shots for you. He can still do that.
All I heard you say there was that I could be a front office executive. Those were the words. I don't think much is going to change in the next couple of days. So if you guys are listening to it the day we've recorded, or obviously the day after, or even as a ramp up to Game 3, we can let all this just kind of marinate. You know, all the strategy talk and the will he, won't he for Marcus Smart and what's to come here in what is obviously an exciting series. It's a gift, Sean. You know, we said against the Nets, like that's a conference finals kind of matchup. Well, this Celtics Bucks matchup is much the same, and if the Celtics do advance and get the Heat in the next round, it would feel like the same thing yet again. It's a deep, fun conference here in this particular postseason. It's been a really a stressful time, but a good time all at once.
Yeah, it'll be even more fun in June when they take on the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah, sounds great. All right, thanks to Evan behind the scenes producing, as always, Sean Deveney, good friend of this program. I'm Adam Kaufman. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you're finding us. We appreciate it. Go Celts, obviously, and if you're watching on the video, and we'll catch you next time.